Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The music died first. It stumbled, a wounded animal, and then fell silent. The violins and flutes choked on the sudden, thick stillness. In the great hall, 1,000 conversations withered. Goblets froze halfway to lips. Laughter evaporated, leaving a stain of fear in the air. Talia Renner felt it in her bones. A tremor, a wrongness that slithered up her spine and coiled cold and tight in her throat. From her place by the kitchens, hidden in the shadows where servants belonged, she watched the chaos bloom. It started with a single gasp from the high table. Then a chair scraped back, a violent, ugly sound against the stone. The Alpha King was on his knees. King Valor Ashbrand, the Wolf of the North, whose presence alone could shatter a lesser man's will, was clutching his chest. His great shoulders heaved. His breath came in ragged, tearing rasps that were louder than the panicked whispers now spreading like fire through dry grass. "Poison," someone hissed. The word was a stone thrown into a flock of birds. The hall erupted. Lords and ladies surged back from the dais, their finery a blur of silks and velvets. Guards drew their swords, their eyes darting everywhere and seeing nothing. The air, once heavy with the scent of roasted meats, wine, and warm bread, was now sharp with the metallic tang of terror. "The Luna! Find the Luna!" A voice roared. It was Lord Cassian, the king's beta, his face pale as bone. "Her grace can soothe the poison's burn. Where is she?" But Talia knew. Everyone knew. Luna Lyra, with her bright, laughing eyes and her perfume that smelled of hothouse roses, was not in the hall. She was not by her king's side. She had slipped away nearly an hour ago, her hand resting on the arm of Lord Vorlag of the Blackwood Pack, their rival, their enemy. Laughter had followed them into the moonlit gardens, a sound as sharp and cruel as broken glass. The king made a sound, a low, guttural groan of agony that silenced the hall once more. He slumped forward, his brow hitting the polished oak of the high table. The silver chalice beside him tipped, spilling the last of its dark red wine across the floor like a spreading wound. That's when they fled. The courtiers, the guards, the other servants. They scattered, seeking help, seeking escape, seeking anyone but the dying king. The royal healer was old, his chambers a world away. The beta was shouting orders that no one heard. In moments, the heart of the great hall was empty, a hollowed-out space of overturned chairs and abandoned feasts. All that remained was the king, and her. Talia's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum in the echoing silence. She was nothing, a servant girl with healer's hands she kept hidden, a secret passed down from a grandmother long turned to dust, a girl known only for her quiet diligence and the spray of freckles across her nose. To be found here, alone with him, was a death sentence. To touch him, that was unthinkable. But the scent, it reached her even from across the hall. Wolfsbane, yes, but laced with something colder, something ancient and silver that smelled like cursed earth and finality. It was a poison designed not just to kill a man, but to unmake a wolf, to sever the soul from the beast. He groaned again, a sound of such profound suffering it broke something inside her. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. The soft soles of her slippers were silent on the stone as she crossed the vast, empty space. Each step was a betrayal of her station, a crime. The air grew colder as she approached the dais, heavier, charged with the raw power now bleeding from the Alpha King. She knelt beside him. Up close, he was a fallen mountain, a myth brought low. His black hair, usually tied back with a leather cord, was damp with sweat against his temples. A scar, pale and jagged, cut through one dark eyebrow. His skin, usually tanned and vital, was turning a ghastly, ashen gray. His scent filled her senses, a storm of pine and winter frost, now soured by the poison's bitter rot. Her hands trembled. The power inside her, the forbidden wellspring of life she had spent her 19 years suppressing, was screaming. It thrummed under her skin, aching to be released, to fight the death that was coiling in this room. "Don't," her mind whispered. "They will hang you for this." But his breathing hitched. It stopped. 1 second. 2. Her choice was gone. Talia pressed her palms flat against his back, over the hard ridges of muscle beneath his leather tunic. The heat of his fevered skin was a shock, a brand against her cool flesh. She closed her eyes, shut out the fear, and let go. The power surged from her. It was not a gentle stream. It was a flash flood, a torrent of raw, untamed life force that ripped through her veins and poured into him. The air crackled. The shadows in the corners of the hall seemed to deepen, to retreat from the invisible light pouring from her hands. It felt like dying and being born all at once. Her own life, her own warmth, was being siphoned away, feeding the furnace of his. She felt the poison. It was a living thing, a cold, black serpent coiled around his heart, squeezing. Her power crashed against it. The serpent hissed, fighting back, lashing at her through the connection. Pain, sharp and icy, shot up her arms. A cry caught in her throat, but she bit it back, tasting blood. She pushed harder. She poured more of herself into him, her scent wild mint, clean rain, and the faint earthy smell of the herbs she carried began to cling to him, a desperate attempt to cleanse the rot. It sank into his skin, his clothes, weaving itself into the very fabric of his being. She felt his wolf. It was a vast, ancient creature, a beast of shadow and snow, and it was dying. It was chained, thrashing in a cage of agony. Her power flowed around it, a soothing balm on its poisoned spirit. The great wolf stilled. It turned its immense, spectral head, and its senses found hers. A connection, primal and terrifying, flared between them. It was an intimacy no servant girl should ever know, a glimpse into the soul of a king. A floorboard creaked by the main entrance. Talia's eyes flew open, her heart seized. Was someone coming back? The Luna? The guards? The sound was gone. Nothing but the wind moaning outside the high castle windows. She was still alone. She looked down. Beneath her hands, the king's breathing was changing. The ragged, tearing gasps were smoothing out, deepening into something steadier. The violent tremors, shaking his body, were starting to calm. The ashen color of his skin was receding, replaced by a faint, returning warmth. It was working. Relief, dizzying and sharp, washed over her. She had saved him. She had committed the greatest of crimes, and she had saved him. But the cost was immense. Her vision swam. The great hall tilted, the tapestries on the walls blurring into streaks of color. Her energy was almost gone, a flickering candle flame in a storm. She had to let go. She had to flee before he woke, before anyone found her. She tried to pull her hands away. They wouldn't move. It felt as though his skin, his very life force, had fused to hers. He was holding her there, not with his muscles, but with his will, with his wolf, which was now stirring from its poisoned sleep. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that vibrated straight through her palms and into her soul. It was not a sound of aggression. It was possessive, acknowledgement. Then his eyes snapped open. They were not the hazy, unfocused eyes of a man returning from the brink of death. They were sharp, clear, the color of a storm-darkened sky, holding an intelligence so ancient and powerful it stole the air from her lungs. Those eyes found hers. They held her, pinned her, saw right through the servant's drab clothes and into the terrified, powerful soul beneath. He took a breath, a deep, shuddering inhale that was the first true breath of his new life. His nostrils flared, tasting the air, tasting her. The scent of hothouse roses was gone, the scent that had saved him. The scent that now clung to him like a second skin was wild mint and rain. His lips parted. A single word, rough and torn from his throat, echoed in the silent hall. A word that sealed her fate. You. The word hung in the air between them. You. It was not a question. It was a statement, an accusation, and a revelation, all at once. The world narrowed to his eyes, those twin storms of gray that saw too much, that stripped away the servant's rags and saw the raw, terrifying power beneath. Talia's breath was a prisoner in her lungs. Her palms were still pressed to his back, fused there by a force she didn't understand. The last of her energy had been spent. She was an empty vessel, a hollow shell kneeling before the king she had just saved. A king who was looking at her as if she were the ghost who'd come to claim his soul. Then, sound. Return to the world. A shout from the far end of the hall. The clatter of armored boots on stone. They were coming back. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the haze of her exhaustion. She had to leave. She had to disappear back into the shadows she came from. If they found her like this, touching him, kneeling over him as if she had any right, they would not ask questions. They would see a witch, an assassin who had failed, or perhaps one who had succeeded in a way they could not yet comprehend. She tried to pull her hands away. He held her fast, not with strength, but with a sudden, searing heat that flared from his skin into hers. A silent command. "Stay." The footsteps grew louder. Lord Cassian's voice, raw with desperation, echoed off the stone arches. "Your Majesty!" "Vailor!" Talia's heart hammered against her ribs. She twisted, trying to break the connection, her eyes wide with a terror that was pure and absolute. "Please," she whispered, a sound with no breath behind it. "Let me go." His expression didn't change. His eyes were locked on her face, searching, cataloging. He saw the freckles scattered across her nose. He saw the tremor in her lip. He saw the wild, untamed thing behind her fear. The guards burst into the great hall, a wave of steel and leather. Lord Cassian was at their head, his sword drawn, his face a mask of grim disbelief. He stopped dead, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. The king, alive, pushing himself up on one elbow. And the servant girl, her hands pressed to his back, her face as pale as death. "Talia?" Cassian breathed her name, a note of confusion warring with suspicion. "What are you doing? Get away from him." He lunged forward. 2 guards followed, their hands reaching for her, ready to drag her away and throw her in the dungeons. A growl. It was low, guttural, and vibrated through the very stone of the floor. It was not the sound of a man. It was the sound of the ancient beast that slept in the king's soul. A sound of absolute, unquestionable authority. Every man in the room froze. Vailor pushed himself into a sitting position. The movement was slow, strained, but it held the terrible grace of a predator. He did not look at his beta. He did not look at his guards. His gaze never left Talia's face. "Do not," the king rasped, his voice rough as gravel. "Touch her." The silence that followed was heavier than a tombstone. Lord Cassian stared, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from his king to the trembling girl, and a dawning horror crept into his expression. He could smell it. The entire room smelled of it. The cloying, artificial scent of the Luna's roses was gone. The air around the throne, around the king himself, was thick with the scent of wild mint and clean rain. Her scent. Vailor's hand moved, lightning fast. He caught her wrist before she could pull away. His grip was not cruel, but it was unbreakable. A manacle of warm, living flesh. The contact sent a jolt through her, a phantom echo of the power that had passed between them. Her pulse leaped against his thumb. "Your Majesty," Cassian said, his voice strained. "She is a servant. What has she done?" "She has saved me," Vailor said, the words simple, brutal, and world-altering. He finally tore his eyes from Talia and fixed his beta with a look that could curdle blood, while my Luna was otherwise occupied. The barb hit its mark. Cassian flinched. The guards shifted, their eyes dropping to the floor. The shame was a palpable thing in the hall. "Bring the royal healer," Vailor commanded, his strength returning with every breath. "Find my wife, and take this girl to the North Tower. Post a guard. No one is to see her. No one. The North Tower. Not the kitchens. Not the servants' quarters. The North Tower was where honored guests and political prisoners were kept. Talia's mind reeled. What was he doing? Cassian hesitated for only a second before nodding sharply. "As you command." He motioned to 2 of the guards. "You heard the king. Escort her, gently." The word was an afterthought, a concession to the king's strange command. 2 guards approached her. One reached for her arm. Before he could touch her, Vailor's grip on her wrist tightened for a fraction of a second. A silent warning. The guard drew his hand back as if burned. Slowly, deliberately, the king released her. The loss of contact was a physical shock. A sudden, piercing cold. Talia stumbled to her feet, her legs threatening to buckle. She couldn't look at him. She couldn't look at anyone. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to contain the tremors that shook her frame. The guards flanked her, keeping a careful distance, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. They saw her not as Talia the servant, but as something new, something other. As they led her from the hall, she heard a commotion at the main entrance. A woman's voice, high and musical, laced with a false panic. "Valor, my love! I came as soon as I heard." Luna Lyra swept into the hall, a vision in emerald silk. Her golden hair was perfectly coiled, her face a mask of beautiful distress. Behind her, a shadow in the doorway, stood Lord Vorlag, his expression unreadable. The Luna's scent filled the air, a heavy, sweet perfume of roses that now seemed suffocating and wrong. She rushed towards the dais, her hand outstretched. "My king, are you—" She stopped. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, landed on Valor. And she smelled it. She smelled Talia on him. Lyra's gaze flickered past her husband, across the hall, and found the small, drab figure being escorted out by the guards. Her mask of concern didn't slip, but something cold and hard entered her eyes. A flicker of possessive fury, a glint of reptilian calculation. Talia felt that gaze like a physical blow. She lowered her head and let the guards hurry her away, down cold corridors and up spiraling stone stairs. The whispers had already begun, slithering from the mouths of the kitchen staff and stable hands who watched her pass. The servant girl, the one who was with the king. Her room in the North Tower was small, but it was not a cell. There was a bed with a thick fur blanket, a small table, and a high, narrow window overlooking the snow-dusted courtyard. It was more comfort than she had ever known. It felt like a cage. The heavy oak door boomed shut behind her. The sound of a key turning in the lock was a final, damning sentence. She was a prisoner. Talia sank onto the edge of the bed, her body finally surrendering to the bone-deep exhaustion. She stared at her hands. They looked the same. Slender, capable, with dirt beneath the nails from the herb garden. But they didn't feel the same. They tingled with a phantom warmth, a memory of power and connection that terrified her more than any punishment. She had poured her life into his. A part of her was now forever entwined with a part of him. When his wolf had stirred, she had felt it not as an observer, but as a participant. It was a bond that defied every law of their world. An Omega servant, whose own wolf spirit was so quiet and hidden most believed she didn't have one, had touched the soul of an Alpha King, and he had felt it too. That was why he had protected her. Not out of kindness. Not out of gratitude. It was something more primal. His wolf, saved by her essence, had recognized her. It had laid a claim. A soft knock echoed, followed by the scrape of the key. The door opened, and a young guard entered with a tray. He didn't look at her, placing the tray of bread, cheese, and water on the table, before backing out and locking the door again. The whispers would be a storm by now. They would say she was a sorceress, that she had poisoned the king only to save him to gain his favor. They would say she was his secret mistress. The Luna would fan those flames herself. Lyra's cold, calculating eyes had promised as much. Talia's quiet life was over. She was now a piece in a game she did not understand, played by kings and queens who would crush her without a thought. Hours passed. The moonlight shifted across the stone floor. She didn't touch the food. She just sat, lost in a sea of fear, when she heard the footsteps, not the heavy tread of the guards. This was a single set of footsteps, measured, deliberate. They stopped outside her door. The key did not scrape this time. There was a heavy thud as the bar was lifted from the other side. The lock clicked open with a quiet, decisive sound of authority. The door swung inward. He filled the doorway, a storm contained in the shape of a man. King Valor stood there, dressed not in his formal tunic, but in a simple black shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. He was still pale, but the specter of death had fled his features. All that remained was a chilling intensity. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, plunging the room into an intimate silence. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his storm-gray eyes moving over her, searching. His scent, pine and winter frost, was clean now, strong, but woven deep within it, unmistakable, was the scent of her. Her heart began to pound, a frantic, wild thing against the cage of her ribs. He took another step closer, his gaze finally meeting hers. "Tell me," he said, his voice a low command that left no room for lies. "Who are you?" The question was a blade, stripping away her name, her station, her 19 years of practiced invisibility. "Who are you? Not what did you do, or how did you do it?" He was asking something deeper, something his wolf had already scented on her soul. Talia's throat was a desert. Words were stones caught in the dust. She couldn't look away from his eyes. They were relentless, peeling back the layers of servant, orphan, healer, until all that was left was the trembling core of her. "I am Talia Renner," she whispered, the name tasting like a lie. It was a label, a sound, but it wasn't the answer he sought. He took another step, closing the distance between them until he was little more than an arm's length away. The air thickened, charged with his presence. He was so much larger in this small room, a force of nature barely contained by the stone walls. His shadow fell over her, a cool weight of pine and frost and power. "Talia Renner," he repeated, the name a strange sound on his tongue. He tested it, tasted it. The girl who tends the gardens, the girl who serves the wine, the girl who is supposed to be nothing. His gaze flickered down to her hands, which were clenched in her lap. "But your hands, they held life. I felt it." Her pulse stumbled. He remembered. He hadn't been lost in the feverish haze of poison. He had been aware, a silent passenger in his own dying body, and he had felt everything. He had felt her power pouring into him, a forbidden river of warmth and healing. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, the denial weak and useless. A muscle tightened in his jaw. "Do not lie to me. Not now." The command was soft, but it carried the weight of a mountain. I was on the edge of the abyss. The poison had severed me from my wolf. I was gone. And then I felt a touch, a warmth. It anchored me. It called my spirit back from the shadows. He raised his hand, not to touch her, but to hover in the space between them. She could feel the heat radiating from his palm, a mirror of the heat she had felt from his skin in the great hall. "It felt," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous murmur, "like coming home." The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. Home, an alpha king, a man of ice and iron, had found something akin to home in the touch of a nameless servant girl. The idea was so monstrous, so impossible, it made her dizzy. This was the bond she had feared. The unnatural connection forged in the crucible of his death and her sacrifice. He felt it too. It wasn't just in her head. "My grandmother was a healer," Talia managed, forcing the words out. It was a half-truth, a desperate shield. "She taught me some of the old ways, with herbs. Herbs." A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. "The royal healer has worked on me since I was a boy. I know the feel of poultices and tinctures. What I felt from you was not of this earth. It was raw creation. It was the life force of the moon goddess herself." He took the final step. He was standing over her now, so close she had to crane her neck to see his face. His scent was overwhelming, a winter storm that made her own quiet spirit tremble and hide. She could see the fine lines around his eyes, the faint stubble darkening his jaw. She could feel the heat of his body, the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. The heart she had restarted. He knelt. The motion was so unexpected, so utterly contrary to the natural order of their world, that Talia flinched back. A king did not kneel. Not to anyone, certainly not to a servant girl in a tower room. He knelt before her, bringing their eyes level. The position was not one of supplication. It was one of interrogation, of intimacy. It trapped her, leaving her with no escape from his suffocating presence. "Every wolf in this kingdom has a scent," he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated in her chest. "My beta smells of oak and loyalty, my guards of steel and leather, my Luna," he said the word with a faint bitter twist, "smells of roses bred in a glass house. They have no thorns, no substance, just a pretty, fleeting fragrance." His eyes held hers, gray storms locking onto her terrified brown gaze. "But you," he breathed, and the sound was full of a terrible, aching discovery. "You smell of the wild places, of mint that grows in the cracks of ancient stones, of rain that has washed the mountains clean. You smell real." He leaned in closer. She froze, every muscle in her body screaming. He wasn't going to hurt her. He was going to do something far worse. He was going to see her. He breathed her in. A slow, deliberate inhale, his nostrils flaring slightly. It wasn't a casual sniff. It was a deep, primal assessment. He was mapping her scent, committing every note to memory, branding it onto his soul. She felt stripped bare, more naked than if he had torn the clothes from her back. When he leaned back, his expression had changed. The hard suspicion was still there, but it was now mingled with a profound, unsettling confusion. A flicker of something that looked almost like reverence. "The poison is gone," he said, his voice thick. "Not dormant, not suppressed, eradicated. My healers are baffled. They say it's a miracle." He looked at her hands again. "They don't know the miracle has a name." Talia's fear was a living thing, clawing at her throat. Please, Your Majesty. I only did what anyone would have done. No, he countered, his voice sharp. Everyone else fled. Everyone else screamed for my Luna. You walked into the silence. You touched death and commanded it to leave. He finally reached out. He didn't grab her wrist this time. His touch was hesitant, almost gentle. His fingers, calloused from wielding a sword, brushed against her cheek. The contact was an electric shock, a spark of the same energy from before, a quiet echo of the torrent she had unleashed, leaped between them. He felt it. His eyes widened slightly. She felt it too, a jolt that ran all the way down to her toes. Her own inner wolf, the timid, sleeping thing she had hidden her entire life, stirred. It lifted its head, awakened by the touch of its alpha, the true alpha. He pulled his hand back as if he'd touched a flame. The look on his face was one of stunned revelation. It's still there, he whispered, more to himself than to her. The connection. This was too much. The intensity of it, the impossible reality of it. Tears pricked the corners of Talia's eyes. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice breaking. His expression hardened again, the moment of awe replaced by the grim mask of a king. I want to know who my enemies are, and who my allies are. A power like yours does not simply appear in a servant girl. You were taught. You were hidden. Why? Are you a weapon waiting to be aimed? The accusation was a slap. The idea that her gift, the one thing she held sacred and secret, could be a weapon, it horrified her. No, never. The denial was fierce, immediate. It is a gift from my line. We are taught to hide it, to use it only when there is no other choice. To reveal it is to be hunted, to be used, or to be burned. He saw the truth in her terror. He saw that she was not a cunning assassin, but a frightened girl caught in a destiny she never asked for. He rose to his feet, pacing the small space like a caged wolf. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. Lord Vorlag, Valor said, stopping by the window and staring out into the moonlit darkness. He has been a thorn in my side for years, testing my borders, stealing my resources. He is ambitious. He wants my throne. He turned his head, his profile a sharp predatory line in the moonlight. And tonight, my Luna was on his arm, laughing, while I was dying. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture of betrayal so stark it made Talia's stomach clench. The poison, the Luna's absence, Lord Vorlag's presence. You believe she was part of it? Talia breathed. I believe nothing is a coincidence, he said grimly. A king cannot afford them. She will have a story, a good one, that she was seeking help, that Vorlag was offering his own healers. She will weep and swear her undying love. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He had seen this play before. He turned to face her fully. Which leaves me with a problem. My wife may be a traitor. The court is a nest of vipers. And my only true ally is a servant girl with the power of a goddess in her hands, who is currently locked in my tower. The weight of his words settled on her. He wasn't just interrogating her. He was confiding in her, sharing a burden of state that would crush a normal person. But the bond between them, that strange, electric echo, hummed in the air. It compelled a different kind of honesty. You are in danger, he stated. As long as you are a secret, you are a threat to them. Lyra saw you. She smelled you on me. She knows you did something. She will not let that stand. She will find a way to silence you, permanently. The blood drained from Talia's face. He was right. The cold look in the Luna's eyes had not been mere jealousy. It had been the calculated appraisal of a threat that needed to be eliminated. What will you do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He walked back to the door, his decision made. His hand rested on the iron handle. He looked at her over his shoulder, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than suspicion or awe in his gaze. It was a dark, dangerous possessiveness, the look of a wolf who has found something precious and will let no one else touch it. I am going to keep you alive, he said, and to do that, I have to keep you close. He opened the door and spoke to the guards outside, his voice once again the iron command of a king. Pack her things. She is being moved to the royal wing. She will serve as my personal attendant. He paused, then added the words that would shatter the foundations of his court and seal Talia's fate forever. She will be quartered in the room adjoining my own. The royal wing was another world. Here, The stone floors were warmed by hidden vents and covered in thick, dark furs that swallowed the sound of footsteps. Silver sconces held smokeless candles that cast a soft, golden glow on tapestries depicting ancient hunts and forgotten battles. The air itself was different, heavy with the scent of old power, beeswax, and the lingering, dominant aroma of the king himself, pine and winter frost. Talia felt like a stray dog in a temple. Her simple wool dress was a smudge of gray against the opulent reds and golds. The guards had escorted her here in the dead of night, their faces grim and unreadable. They had deposited her inside the chambers adjoining the king's, and the heavy, carved oak door had closed behind her with a sound of utter finality. Her new cage was gilded. It was a sitting room, larger than the entire cottage she'd grown up in. A fire crackled in a vast stone hearth. A low table was laden with a silver pitcher of water and a plate of fruit she didn't recognize. Beyond an archway, she could see a bedroom with a four-poster bed draped in velvet curtains. But it was the other door that held her attention, a simple, unadorned door of dark wood. It led directly to the king's chambers. There was no lock on her side. She was not his guest. She was his possession, kept close, where he could watch her, protect her, use her. The thought sent a tremor of fear and a strange, unwelcome flutter of something else through her. She paced the length of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her mind was a whirlwind of the king's words. My Luna may be a traitor. My only true ally is you. He had placed a burden on her shoulders she was not strong enough to carry. The fate of a king, of a kingdom, now rested in the hands of a girl who had spent her life hiding from a single shadow. A sound from the adjoining room made her freeze. The soft thud of boots hitting the floor, the sigh of a man shedding a heavy weight. He was there. Just a few inches of wood and air separated them. Her heart began to pound, a frantic, uneven rhythm. She could feel him, a low thrum of energy that resonated through the floorboards. It was the bond, the echo of her touch. It was like a string pulled taut between them, vibrating with his every movement, his every breath. She squeezed her eyes shut. This was madness. She had to find a way out. She had to convince him to let her go, to let her disappear back into the anonymity of the lower city. The connecting door opened. Talia's eyes snapped open. He stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the firelight from his own room. He had shed his tunic and wore only his dark trousers and a loose linen shirt, unlaced at the throat. His hair was unbound, falling in dark waves around his powerful shoulders. He looked less like a king and more like the wolf. He was wild, untamed, and utterly dangerous. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his gray eyes shadowed and intense. The silence stretched, thick with a tension that was almost a physical thing. You're afraid, he finally said. It wasn't a question. Talia found her voice, though it trembled. Anyone in my position would be. You are not in anyone's position, he countered, stepping fully into her room. He left the door open behind him. You are in a position of my making. I put you here for a reason. To protect me? She asked, a note of skepticism in her voice. Or to watch me? To make sure the weapon doesn't fall into other hands? A flicker of something surprise? Respect? Passed through his eyes. Both, he admitted, his honesty as sharp as a blade. I told you, I cannot afford coincidences, and you are the greatest coincidence of my life. He walked to the fire, extending his hands to the warmth. The flames cast dancing shadows across the hard planes of his face, accentuating the scar that cut through his eyebrow. She saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the deep weariness of a man surrounded by enemies, poisoned in his own home. Lord Cassian does not trust you, Valor said, his voice a low rumble. He thinks you are a witch. He thinks you ensorcelled me. And what do you think? Talia dared to ask. He turned from the fire to look at her, his gaze so direct it felt like a physical touch. I think you are something new, something the old laws have no name for. He took a step towards her. When you touched me, it wasn't just my body you healed. You healed my wolf. The poison was trying to cage him, to burn him out of me. But your power, it was like cool water on a scorched earth. He recognized you. Her breath hitched. The king's wolf was the soul of the pack, the anchor of their kingdom. For it to recognize her, a wolfless omega, it was blasphemy. That's not possible, she whispered. Isn't it? He was closer now. Too close. The scent of him was a physical presence, wrapping around her, sinking into her. My wolf has been restless for years, ever since my bonding to Lyra, a political match, a loveless cage. He never accepted her. Her scent is an irritation to him. Her touch, a lie. He stopped in front of her, his shadow swallowing her whole. But you. When I woke, and my first breath was of you. He was calm for the first time in a decade. He was content. The confession hung between them, a fragile, terrifying thing. It was a secret of the soul, a weakness no king should ever reveal. He was showing her the cracks in his armor, the wounds beneath the crown. He was trusting her, not by choice, but because the bond between them demanded it. "She will try to kill you," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Lyra, when the sun rises, she will learn you are here, in these rooms. Her jealousy is a vile, possessive thing, her pride, even more so. She will not tolerate a rival, especially one who succeeded where she failed." "I am not her rival," Talia insisted, horrified. "It doesn't matter what you are," he growled, a flicker of the wolf in his eyes. "It only matters what she perceives you to be. And she will perceive you as the ultimate threat." He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from her arm. "Which is why you will not leave these rooms. You will not speak to anyone but me or Cassian. You will eat what I eat, drink what I drink. You are under my personal protection. Your life is now tied to mine." The finality of his words was a death knell to her old life. She was his prisoner, for her own safety. "I can't," she said, shaking her head, the last vestiges of her defiance rising up. "I can't live like this. I am not a courtier. I don't know how to play these games." "You won't have to," he said. "Your only duty is to stay alive, and to—" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to her hands. "To be ready, should I need your gift again." So that was it. The other side of the coin. She was his healer. His secret weapon, held in reserve. A bitter taste filled her mouth. She had saved him out of compassion, and he had turned her into a possession, a tool. But then she looked into his eyes, and the bitterness faded. She saw not a tyrant, but a desperate, cornered man, using the only weapon he had against the vipers in his own den. "I need an oath from you, Talia Renner," he said, his voice deadly serious. She waited, her heart pounding. "Swear to me that your power will be used for me and me alone. Swear that you will never use it against me, or on behalf of my enemies." It was a cage of words, an oath of fealty that would bind her to him as surely as any iron chain. But what choice did she have? To refuse was to declare herself his enemy. To refuse was a death sentence. But as she looked at him, at the king who had knelt before her, who had confessed the secrets of his soul, who had smelled home on her skin, she realized something else. She didn't want to refuse. A strange, frightening instinct deep inside her, the instinct of her own hidden wolf, wanted to agree. It wanted to anchor itself to his strength. It wanted to belong. She met his gaze, her chin held high. "My gift is for healing. It is not a sword to be wielded. I will not use it to harm. That is not the oath I ask for," he pressed, his eyes narrowing. "It is the only one I can give," she replied, her voice steady. "I swear I will never use my gift to bring harm to you or your kingdom, and I will answer your call, should you have need of my healing." It was a careful negotiation, a line drawn in the sand. She was not his weapon. She was his healer, his alone. He stared at her for a long moment, reading the unshakable truth in her eyes. He saw that he could not bully her into submission. He could not command this power. He could only ask for its allegiance. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I accept your terms." To seal the oath, he did something that shattered her world completely. He took her right hand, the one that had rested on his back, and raised it. She thought he might shake it, a formal agreement between allies. Instead, he turned it over and pressed his lips to the center of her palm. The touch was a brand, a searing, electric fire that shot up her arm and straight to her heart. It was more intimate than a kiss on the lips. It was an acknowledgement, a claiming. The echo between them roared to life, a silent song that only they could hear. He was sealing their pact not just with words, but with his body, with his spirit. He kept his lips pressed there for a long moment, his eyes closed. He breathed in, and she knew he was breathing in the memory of her power, the scent of her skin. When he finally lifted his head, his gray eyes were dark, turbulent pools of emotion. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and she saw the king, the wolf, and the man all warring for dominance within him. "From this night forward," he murmured, his voice thick and rough, You belong to me. The words should have terrified her. But as the four, silent, humming bond between them resonated with the truth of his claim, a terrifying, treacherous part of her soul whispered back, I know. The whispers started before dawn. They seeped under the doors and through the keyholes of the royal wing, venomous and sharp. Talia heard them from the other side of the connecting door, the clipped, urgent tones of Lord Cassian reporting to his king. In the adjoining chambers, Your Majesty? The court is in an uproar. They are calling her a witch, a courtesan. Let them talk. Valor's voice cut through, cold as the northern wind. Their gossip is the buzzing of flies. It cannot harm me. It is not you I fear for. Cassian's reply was low, strained. It is her. Luna Lyra has demanded an audience. She is furious. She speaks of treason, of dark magic. She is rallying the High Council. A heavy silence followed. Talia pressed her ear to the wood, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She could feel the king's anger through the bond, a distant, rolling thunder. Lyra may rally whomever she likes, Valor said, his voice dangerously soft. She would do well to remember who holds the crown. The girl stays. That is my final word. The door to the king's chambers opened and closed. Cassian was gone. Talia was left in the silence, the beta's words echoing in her mind. She is furious. The sun had barely risen when the summons came. Not for her, but for Valor. An emergency session of the High Council. Talia watched from her window as the lords of the great packs crossed the courtyard, their faces like granite, their cloaks whipping in the wind. They were vultures circling a throne they sensed was weakened. Valor came into her chambers before he left. He was dressed in black leather and steel, the wolf of the north in his full, intimidating glory. The crown was a simple circlet of blackened iron on his brow, a stark contrast to the silver and gold his father had worn. He was a king forged for war, not for politics. He didn't say a word. He simply walked to her, his eyes searching her face. He was looking for fear. He found it, but he also found a flicker of defiance she didn't know she possessed. He reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his calloused fingers a stark contrast to the softness of her skin. The brief touch sent a jolt through the bond, a silent message of reassurance. I will handle this. Then he was gone. The hours that followed were the longest of Talia's life. She was a ghost in a gilded cage, pacing the luxurious furs, starting at every sound. The guards outside her main door were silent sentinels. They brought her food, but she couldn't eat. The knot of dread in her stomach was too tight. She could feel him. Even with the stone walls and the distance between them, the bond was a constant, low hum beneath her skin. She felt the sharp spikes of his frustration, the cold weight of his authority as he faced his counsel. She felt his focus, his will of iron. But underneath it all, she felt a current of deep, aching weariness. He was a king standing alone. The afternoon sun was slanting low when she heard the voices. They were approaching her chambers. One was the sharp, melodic voice of Luna Lyra. The other was the reedy, unpleasant tone of Lord Valerius, the ancient head of the council. Unacceptable, a common servant, a hedge witch, given rooms next to the king. It is an insult to the queen, an insult to the stability of the realm, Valerius was saying. It is more than an insult, my lord. Lyra's voice was smooth as honey, but laced with poison. It is a danger. Who knows what spells she has woven, what potions she has slipped him. He has not been himself since the incident. Talia backed away from the door, her blood turning to ice. They were coming for her. The guards outside her door spoke, their voices firm. The king's orders were absolute. No one is to enter. Do you dare to bar the way of your queen? Lyra's voice rose, sharp and imperious. Open this door, or I will have you stripped of your rank and flogged in the courtyard. There was a moment of hesitation. Then, the sound of the heavy bar being lifted. The guards were loyal to the king, but they could not defy the queen to her face without sparking a crisis. The door swung open. Luna Lyra stood there, a vision of righteous fury. She was dressed in a gown the color of blood, her golden hair braided with silver wires. Her blue eyes, usually so bright and laughing, were chips of ice. Behind her stood Lord Valerius, his thin lips pressed into a sneer, and two of the Luna's personal guards, their hands on their swords. Lyra's gaze swept the room and landed on Talia. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. So, the Luna said, her voice dripping with contempt as she glided into the room. This is the creature that has bewitched my husband. Talia stood her ground, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She would not cower. She had the king's protection, even if he wasn't here. "I have done nothing, Your Grace," Talia said, her voice quiet but steady. Lyra laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You have done everything. You crawled to his side when he was weak. You stank up his chambers with your common scent. You have filled his head with your filth and magic, turning him against his own bonded mate." She stalked closer, her perfume of roses a suffocating cloud. "He looks at you, and he sees a savior. I look at you, and I see a parasite, a tick, grown fat on the king's blood." "The king was dying," Talia said, her voice rising. "You were in the gardens with his enemy." The slap was so fast, Talia didn't see it coming. The force of it snapped her head to the side, her cheek stinging, the taste of blood sharp in her mouth. Lyra's beautiful face was twisted into a mask of rage. "You will not speak of things you do not understand. Little rat, I was securing an alliance. I was doing my duty as queen while you were practicing your dark arts on my husband's unconscious body." Lord Valerius stepped forward, his eyes gleaming. "The council agrees, Your Grace. This anomaly cannot be tolerated. She is a threat to the royal line, to the purity of the Ashbrand blood. She will be removed," Lyra said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. She gestured to her guards. "Take her. To the dungeons. We will have the truth of her witchcraft by morning." The guards advanced. Talia's heart hammered against her ribs. Valor was not here. His protection was just a word. These men would obey their queen. She backed away, her eyes darting towards the door to the king's chambers. It was her only hope, an impossible one. "You cannot do this," Talia whispered, her voice shaking. The king is being led astray by a whore's magic." Lyra shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "He will thank me when his mind is clear again. Seize her." One of the guards grabbed her arm, his grip like an iron vice. The other moved to grab her other arm. Panic, raw and primal, surged through her. A cornered animal, she did the only thing she could. She screamed. It was not a word. It was a raw, desperate cry for help, a plea sent out into the world. She pushed all of her fear, all of her desperation, into the bond. She focused on the humming thread that connected her to Valor and screamed his name down it, a silent, soul-deep shriek. "Valor." The guard who held her arm suddenly grunted in pain and stumbled back, shaking his hand as if he'd been burned. A flicker of her power, wild and untamed, had lashed out in her terror, but it was too late. The other guard had her. Lyra was smiling, a triumphant, cruel curve of her lips. And then the world exploded. The main doors to the suite were thrown open with such force that they slammed against the stone walls, the wood groaning in protest. King Valor stood on the threshold. He was no longer a king at a council meeting. He was the Alpha. His face was a thunderhead of absolute fury, his gray eyes blazing with a light that was not entirely human. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that shook the very foundations of the room. It was the sound of a predator whose territory had been invaded, whose mate had been threatened. Every person in the room froze. Lyra's guards went pale, their hands dropping from their swords. Lord Valerius took an involuntary step back, his sneer wiped clean from his face, replaced by pure fear. Valor's eyes scanned the scene, the terrified girl, the red mark on her cheek, the Luna's triumphant stance. His gaze was a physical weight, a promise of violence. He moved. It wasn't a walk. It was the lethal, flowing grace of a wolf closing in on its prey. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and stood directly in front of Talia, shielding her with his body. He didn't look at her, but she felt his rage, his protectiveness, wash over her through the bond. It was a terrifying, exhilarating storm. He turned his head slowly, fixing his gaze on his wife. "What?" he snarled, each word a stone hitting a shield. "Did you think you were doing?" Lyra, for the first time, seemed to falter. She raised her chin, trying to recapture her authority. "I was cleansing this castle of your pet witch. I was doing my duty as your queen." "Your duty?" Valor's voice was deceptively soft, yet it carried more menace than any shout. "Your duty was to be by my side when I fell. Your duty was not to be laughing in the arms of my rival while my life bled out on the floor." He took a step towards her. Lyra took one back. "You dare to speak of duty to me? She has poisoned your mind against me," Lyra cried, gesturing at Talia behind him. "Get rid of her, Valor, and things can be as they were." "As they were?" He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "They will never be as they were." He looked from his wife to the cowering Lord Valerius, and then to the guards. His decision was made. The choice had been forced upon him. He raised his voice, pitching it to carry not just through the room, but through the entire royal wing. It was the voice of a king passing judgment. Luna Lyra, of House Ashbrand, for conspiring against the crown, and for assaulting a protected ward of the king, you are hereby stripped of your title and confined to your chambers. You are no longer queen of this realm. The gasp that filled the room was a collective shock. Stripping a Luna of her title was unheard of. It was a declaration of war against her family, her pack. Lyra stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. You cannot. The bond, the mating ceremony, was a contract. Valor finished for her, his voice utterly devoid of feeling. A political lie, and it is broken. He turned to Lord Valerius, his eyes burning like cold fire. As for you, Valerius, the council will have a new head by morning. You are dismissed. Consider yourself fortunate I allow you to keep your head. He looked at Talia then, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. He saw the mark on her face, and his rage spiked anew. He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the red outline of Lyra's hand on her cheek. The touch was a silent promise. Never again. He turned back to the stunned room. He put his arm around Talia's shoulders, pulling her firmly against his side. It was a gesture of blatant, shocking possession, an undeniable claim in front of his treacherous wife and the highest lord in the land. This woman, Valor declared, his voice ringing with absolute power, saved my life. She holds my favor. She is under my direct protection. Anyone who touches her, anyone who threatens her, answers to me. Let the court whisper, let our enemies watch, and let them all learn this lesson well. He looked directly at Lyra, his final words a death sentence to her ambition. The throne has made its choice. The castle held its breath. After the king's declaration, a silence fell over the royal wing, a stillness so profound it felt like the moment after a lightning strike. Lyra, her face a ruin of shattered pride, had been escorted away, no longer a queen but a prisoner in her own opulent rooms. Lord Valerius had scurried away like the rat he was. The castle was in shock, digesting the impossible. Valor had not released her. His arm remained a heavy, possessive brand around her shoulders as he dismissed the terrified guards and closed the door to her suite. Only when they were alone did he let her go, and the sudden loss of his warmth was a cold shock. He turned to face her, his eyes dark with the storm of his own making. He had just torn his kingdom in two for her. He had cast aside his Luna, defied his counsel, and declared a servant girl his chosen ward, all but naming her his consort in front of his enemies. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. His gaze was fixed on the red mark on her cheek. Talia shook her head, though her cheek throbbed. "No, your majesty." "Valor," he corrected her, the word a low command. "My name is Valor. You have saved my life. You have earned the right to speak it." He stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch her face, but his hand stopped, hovering in the air between them. He was afraid to hurt her, she realized. This great, fearsome king, who had just faced down his entire court without flinching, was afraid his touch would be too rough for her. The thought undid her. A choked sob escaped her lips. The terror and shock of the past 2 days finally broke through her control. Tears welled in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks. Valor's hand dropped to his side. He looked lost. A warrior facing an enemy he had no weapon against. Talia. She couldn't stop the tears. They were for her old life, lost forever. They were for the fear of what was to come. And they were for this impossible, broken king who had shielded her with his own body. "What have you done?" She wept, her voice muffled by her hands. "You've declared war on your own queen, on your own council. For me, I'm nobody. They will tear you apart for this." "Let them try," he growled, the sound a deep vibration in the room. He took her hands and gently pulled them away from her face, forcing her to look at him. His thumbs brushed away her tears, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Do you think I don't know what I have done? I have been a king in a cage for 10 years, Talia. A cage of politics, of duty, of a loveless bond that was slowly strangling my wolf. I was dying long before the poison ever touched my lips." His confession was raw, bleeding. "When I woke up," he continued, his voice dropping to a murmur, his eyes boring into hers, "and all I could smell was you. It was the first clean breath I had taken in a decade. You didn't just heal my body. You reminded me what it felt like to be alive. To have a wolf that was not at war with its own soul. He held her gaze, his own eyes turbulent with a feeling so powerful, so fierce, it stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, more primal. It was the call of the bond between them, now humming with a desperate, undeniable truth. They were right about one thing, he admitted, a dark, humorless smile touching his lips. You have bewitched me, not with spells, but with this. He let go of one of her hands and pressed his palm to his own chest, right over his heart. You touched me here, in a place I thought had turned to stone. I will not let you go. I cannot. The raw honesty of his words shattered the last of her defenses. He was not a king making a political move. He was a man, a wolf, clinging to the one thing that felt real in his world of lies. And she was no longer just a frightened servant girl. Standing here, with her hand in his, feeling the echo of his soul through the bond, she was something more. She was the woman who had saved a king, and she was the woman he had chosen. They will not stop, she whispered, her fear for him overriding her own. Lyra's family is powerful. Lord Vorlag will see this as an opportunity, a weakness to exploit. I am aware, he said, his expression grim. War is coming. Perhaps it was always coming, but now. He looked at her, and the weight of the world was in his eyes. Now I have something to fight for. The unspoken question hung between them. He had made his choice. Now she had to make hers. Could she stand by his side? Could she accept the terrifying honor he had given her, the dangerous position he had placed her in? To flee now would be to abandon him, to leave him to face the storm he had unleashed for her sake. It would make his sacrifice meaningless. To stay was to accept a fate she had never imagined. It was to walk a path of blood and shadow, with enemies on all sides. It was to bind herself to this fierce, broken man and his uncertain future. She looked at her hand, still held in his. She thought of her quiet, empty life before, the loneliness, the constant fear of her secret being discovered. She had been safe, but she had not been alive, not like this. Slowly, she curled her fingers, her hand tightening around his. It was a small gesture, but it was an answer, an oath. A profound relief washed over his face, so deep it seemed to erase the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. The warrior king looked, for a moment, like a man who had been given a reason to hope. That night, she did not sleep in her own chambers. He did not command it. He simply stood at the connecting door, his expression unreadable in the firelight, and held out his hand. The invitation was clear. Stay with me. Don't leave me alone tonight. Talia walked to him and placed her hand in his. He led her into his chambers, a vast room dominated by a hearth large enough to stand in, and a bed carved from the dark, ancient wood of a weirwood tree. The scent of pine and winter frost was everywhere, a comforting blanket. It was his den, the heart of his power. He did not lead her to the bed. Instead, he led her to the two large chairs by the fire. He sat in one, and gestured for her to take the other. He released her hand and poured 2 goblets of wine, handing one to her. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the flames dance. The quiet was not awkward. It was a shared space, a respite from the storm outside. The bond between them was a soft, warm hum, a silent conversation that needed no words. Tell me about your gift, he finally said, his voice a low rumble. Your grandmother? She had it too? Talia nodded, clutching the warm goblet in her hands. And her mother before her. It is passed down the female line of my family. We are different. Our wolves are quiet, internal. They are not made for fighting or ruling, but for nurturing, for healing. Why did you hide it? He asked. Because people fear what they do not understand, she said simply. In the villages, women like us are called hedge witches. They are blamed for failed crops and sick livestock. In the courts, she looked at him, her meaning clear. They are seen as weapons, or threats. He nodded, a grim understanding in his eyes. They are right to be afraid. A power like yours could change the fate of kingdoms. It is not meant to, she insisted. It is meant to mend what is broken. He looked at her then, a long, searching look that seemed to see right into her soul. And what of you, Talia Renner? What is broken in you that needs mending? The question surprised her. No one had ever asked her that before. She was the healer, the giver. No one ever considered that she might have wounds of her own. I was alone, she whispered, the confession tasting of dust and old pain. My parents died when I was young. My grandmother raised me, But she is gone now too. I have spent my whole life hiding what I am, pretending to be less. It is a lonely way to live. He reached across the space between their chairs, his fingers finding hers, lacing them together. His touch was warm, solid, an anchor. "You are not alone anymore," he said. And it was not a king's decree, but a solemn vow. They stayed like that until the fire burned down to embers, their hands clasped, the silence between them filled with the dawning of a terrible and beautiful new world. He had not kissed her. He had not tried to take her to his bed. He had simply shared his fire, his wine, and his solitude. He had shown her the man beneath the crown. When she finally grew drowsy, her head nodding, he stood and gently pulled her to her feet. He led her to the massive bed, pulling back the heavy fur blankets. "Sleep," he murmured. "You are safe here." She climbed into the bed, the linens cool against her skin. They smelled of him. She watched as he walked not to the other side of the bed, but to the long fur rug before the dying fire. He lay down there, his back to her, a silent guardian between her and the door, a king sleeping on the floor to protect a servant girl. As Talia drifted into a dreamless sleep, she knew she had made her choice. She had not just chosen to stay in the castle, to stand by his side in the coming war. She had chosen him. She curled into the warmth of his bed, breathing in the scent of pine and winter, and for the first time in her life, she felt the quiet stirrings of her own wolf, finally feeling safe enough to come home. The night was far from over. The enemies were gathering. But here, in the heart of the storm, shielded by the Alpha King who had chosen her, she was no longer afraid. She belonged here. A year had passed. The first snow of the next winter was falling, dusting the world in a soft, forgiving white. Talia knelt in the royal garden. Her bare hands plunged into the cold, dark earth. She was not hiding. She was not a servant tending her mistress's flowers. She was coaxing the last bit of life from a patch of hardy wild mint before the deep frost claimed it. Its sharp, clean scent clung to her fingers, a familiar comfort. The garden had changed. Under her care, the perfectly manicured, scentless roses of the former Luna had been uprooted. In their place grew wolfsbane and silverleaf, moonpetal, and kingsthorn herbs for healing, for strength. The air no longer smelled of a perfumer's bottle. It smelled of the earth, of life, of truth. The whispers in the castle had changed too. They no longer called her a witch. They called her the king's healer, the king's shadow, the quiet power behind the throne. They spoke of her with a mixture of awe and fear, but always with respect. The war had been short and brutal. Lyra's family, House Thorn, had rallied to her cause, crying foul play. Lord Vorlag had seen his chance and joined them, his Blackwood pack a dark stain on the northern borders. They had called it the War of the Thornless Rose, but they had underestimated the wolf they'd tried to cage. Valor, freed from the poison of his court and fueled by a righteous fury, Talia had felt thrumming through their bond every single day, had been merciless. He was not the weary king they remembered. He was the Ashbrand of old, a storm of iron and will. Vorlag fell in single combat, his pack immediately surrendering to their true alpha. House Thorn was broken, its lands forfeit to the crown. Lyra herself, stripped of all titles and allies, had been exiled to a remote convent on the southern coast, her cloying scent of roses finally banished from the kingdom. The realm was healing, and so was its king. Talia felt him before she heard him. A warmth spread through her chest, a familiar hum along the thread that bound their souls together. She didn't need to turn. She knew the sound of his footsteps on the snow-dusted gravel. She knew the scent of pine and winter frost that preceded him like a royal banner. He stopped just behind her. The great, intimidating presence that had once terrified her was now the source of her deepest calm. "The earth will freeze your hands," he said, his voice a low rumble that was hers and hers alone. "The earth knows me," she replied softly, not looking up. "It doesn't mind." A long moment of comfortable silence passed between them, broken only by the soft hiss of falling snow. Then, a heavy fur cloak, his cloak, was draped over her shoulders. It was impossibly warm, saturated with his scent. It felt like an embrace. He knelt in the snow beside her, his powerful frame folding with an easy grace. He was not dressed for court. He wore simple black leather trousers and a thick woolen tunic. The iron crown was absent from his brow. Here in the garden, he was not just her king. He was her Valor. "Lord Cassian tells me the granaries are full," Talia said, finally turning to look at him. The weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a clear, calm, gray that mirrored the winter sky. The harvest was good this year. The land is at peace, he agreed. A good harvest is the first sign. His gaze dropped to her hands, still covered in dark soil. You are the first sign. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently taking her hand. He brushed the dirt from her skin, his touch both a reverence and a possession. The simple contact sent a familiar jolt of warmth through the bond. The council is restless again, he said, his thumb stroking the center of her palm, right where he had sealed their oath with a kiss. They say a king needs a queen, that the throne beside mine cannot remain empty. They wish for me to legitimize my reign with a new alliance, a new bond. Talia's heart gave a single, painful throb. She had known this day would come. She was the king's healer, his confidant, the woman who slept in his bed and warmed his soul. But she was not a queen. She had no title, no great family name. She was still, in the eyes of the law, Talia Renner, the servant girl. I see, she said, her voice quiet. She tried to pull her hand away, but his grip tightened, refusing to let her go. No, he said, his voice firm. He turned her hand over and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her pulse point. His eyes never left hers. You don't see. I let them have their say. I listened to their talk of alliances and bloodlines, and when they were finished, I told them the truth. He leaned closer, his breath a warm cloud in the cold air. I told them that my soul already has a mate. I told them my wolf chose its Luna a year ago, in a silent, empty hall, when he was brought back from the brink of death. I told them there is only one scent that will ever mean home to me. Tears pricked Talia's eyes, hot, sudden. The throne is not what makes a queen, Talia, he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer hid from her. It is the woman who is the soul of the king, the anchor of the alpha, the heart of the pack. He released her hand and reached into his tunic. He pulled out a simple, elegant circlet, not of iron or gold, but of woven silver, crafted to look like intertwined branches of wild mint. He held it out to her. It was not a command. It was a question, the most important one he would ever ask. The kingdom needs a queen, he said, his voice breaking with the weight of his love. But I just need you. Will you be my Luna, Talia Renor? Will you be my wife? The snow fell around them, blanketing the world in a holy silence. The ghosts of the past year, the fear, the betrayal, the bloodshed, were finally laid to rest. All that was left was this man, her king, her Valor, kneeling in the snow and offering her not just a crown, but his entire world. She didn't need to speak. Her answer was in the tears of joy that traced paths down her cheeks. It was in the brilliant, radiant smile that broke across her face. She leaned forward and sealed her oath with a kiss. It was a kiss of mint and pine, of earth and winter, of two souls finally, irrevocably, becoming one. The bond between them flared, a supernova of light and warmth that defied the winter cold. His arms went around her, pulling her from the frozen ground and into his lap, holding her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever touched. He was a king who had been born in a cage of duty. She was an Omega who had been born to be a sacrifice. But tonight, together, they were the beginning of a new reign. A reign built not on lies and politics, but on a love that had healed a king and crowned a healer. He lifted his head, his forehead resting against hers, and whispered the words that would define the rest of their lives. My queen. The moon had seen their scars long enough. Tonight, she watched them begin to reign.